It started with President Macron of France on Monday and proceeded on Thursday with Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Great Britain. Two European leaders who came to try to encourage and to nudge President Trump away from the might makes right worldview and to embrace anew the old order by offering security guarantees for Ukraine. Now, much of the media has been describing Starmer's visit as a triumph, as indeed was Macron's before him. Basically because the prospect had been very real that Trump might turn on them randomly and humiliate them in front of the world, but in actual fact, he didn't. In other words, they petted the big dog wagged its tail rather than biting their hand. You might think that's not normally the ceiling of ambition for such visits, and you would be right, but this is the world we now live in. Starmer's triumphs, such as they were, came in the form of promises strictly related to the UK's own relationship with the United States. Trump seemed pretty okay with the proposed Chagos Islands deal that many had predicted the US would seek to prevent. Trump was positive about the idea of establishing a trade deal with the UK based on technology and not slapping tariffs on the country even as he gears up to do so for the EU. And in return, Keir Starmer lavished all that Britain's soft power could offer, a letter from the King inviting Trump to an unprecedented second state visit. And lots of flattery, delivered in a British accent. But let's be clear, where Starmer drew a blank was any attempt to get Trump to accept that the US needed to be involved in a security guarantee for Ukraine following any peace deal. The British military is just so great, he said. They didn't need any help looking after themselves. Starmer gently and diplomatically countered, talking about our long history of always being there for each other when it was needed. He might as well have been doing diplomacy via the medium of mime. I suppose he could have yelled at Trump that, look, when the US decided to go off on a totally mad invasion of Iraq, Britain had been the only one to go along with them, as we did every other time. But that's the sort of language that gets you bitten. To be fair, Trump did follow up his comment with, if they need help, I'll always be with the British, okay? Take that as a promissory note for whatever the bank will give you in exchange for it. Reports suggest that in private, Starmer advanced the argument that Trump had been right as always to demand that Europeans step up to the task of defending Europe, and Starmer had gained credit on that score by announcing the boosting of UK defence spending at the expense of the aid budget. But he argued with the Donald that for that to work, the US couldn't step away too quickly. Even at the urgent pace that had now been produced, it would take time to be able to fill the gap that America's absence would create. Hard to know how much of that, if anything, actually stuck. What Trump had to offer on the security guarantee front, along with his apparent faith in the British military, was a similar faith in Vladimir Putin sticking to any deal that might be agreed. Neither of those magical thinking beliefs will be much comfort to the British, however much they've been talking up the success of Starmer's trip. That said, it's still by no means obvious on what basis Trump even thinks a peace deal will be possible with Russia. This week, in Vladimir Putin's address to the Federal Security Service Board, he continued to reject US negotiating terms, demanding that Ukraine surrender lots more territory. In particular, Putin stated that Donbass and Novorossiya are integral parts of Russia. As the Institute for the Study of War has pointed out, Putin has defined Novorossiya as all of eastern and southern Ukraine, including many territories not currently occupied by Russian forces. The point is that while Keir Starmer did very well in avoiding getting bitten by the big dog, and while he has secured a number of concessions that continue to make perfect sense in the new world order, he got nothing that required any sort of commitment to the old rules-based order. And he got what he got by playing the card as America's greatest ally, certainly not the sort of ally that would ever correct him in front of journalists as Macron did, or that would go out of its way to criticise him in public. It's encouraging that this didn't stop Britain from supporting Ukraine's motion to the United Nations, or from amending the US motion to mention that, Russia invaded Ukraine and this was a bad thing. And it didn't stop him from pushing back against Vice President J.D. Vance's predictable push about whether the UK was or wasn't committed to free speech. It was, just for the avoidance of doubt. But it's worth noting that Starmer's party activists at home absolutely hate Trump. And he will get no credit with them, the exact opposite, for being seen to be so complimentary, flattering the big beast in exactly the way that actually works. They would rather he stood up to Trump, insulted him in public, and let the national interest pay the price. Right now, Starmer sees that as the usual left-wing self-indulgence, and he's secure enough in his position to mostly ignore it. He did arrive home to the news of his foreign aid minister's resignation in protest at the savaging of the aid budget, but he can cope with that. If Trump continues on the course that he has set out, however, Starmer will be tested more and more on the mismatch between his vision of the world and the new realities. Sooner or later, the logic is that he will feel moved that he has to make a stand. Maybe not sooner, but some point in the next 4 years, unless things change substantially from the current direction of travel. In the meantime, President Zelensky is next in line, just a few hours away from his tricky encounter with Trump at the time of shooting this video. They will sign the critical minerals deal. The deal contains no security guarantees and will make zero difference to the question of whether a peace deal with Russia is possible or not. But at least it means that Trump has stopped calling Zelensky a dictator. For now. What happens next is a big question mark. Trump has boasted big, Putin awaits. Regardless of a minerals deal, Trump could still take part in a carve-up of the world with Putin that sees him abandon Ukraine to a dismal fate. If he's not going to do that, then it's hard to imagine exactly what he can come up with, unless it's a benefit for Russia so substantial that it materially offsets the value that Putin places on total control of Ukraine. I can think of a few things Trump could perhaps offer. I just don't see any motivation for him to offer those things on behalf of Ukraine rather than on behalf of concessions from Russia to America's direct interests. This will be the test of just how much the shift to the new might makes right world order is following along predictable lines or not. Right now, Russia has just announced who its new ambassador to the United States will be, career diplomat Alexander Darchiev. Another small step in the normalization of relations between the two superpowers. But to what end game? Don't expect to find that out just yet. It will come soon enough, possibly too soon for President Zelensky.